Hello, welcome to Prejim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 83 of ASP.NET video series. In part 82 of this video series, we have discussed the basics of application pools. In this session, we'll discuss about achieving isolation between applications by associating them with different application pools. Let's understand that with an example. I have an ASP.NET Web Application project here with name Web Application 1, and in this web application I have this web form 1 where we have this button control. Obviously when we double click that, the event handler gets generated, and if you look at the code here, it's pretty simple code. In the page load we have a check here, if not is post back, meaning when this web form first loads up, if it is the initial get request, we're actually creating a session variable with key application underscore one underscore data, and within that we have this data, application one data. And then when the user clicks the button, if that session variable is not null, then we are retrieving the value out of that session variable and then writing it to the response stream. On the other hand, if it is null, then it comes to the else block and then it prints out session data not available. Okay, pretty simple example. Now if I run this project by pressing Control F5, by default Visual Studio uses the built-in development server. So you can look at that random port number that we have here, and then if I go into the taskbar, double click that, you can see this is the built-in ASP.NET development server. Now I don't want to use the Visual Studio built-in development server, because if I'm just developing the application, then that's fine. But if I want to make these applications available to users either on the internet or intranet, then I have to deploy them to the IIS, Internet Information Services. Now let's see how to deploy that to IIS. So first open up IIS. To open IIS, go to Start, click on Start, type in Run, press Enter, type iNet Manager, iNet MGR, and click OK. That should open up Internet Information Services. Now when we expand the root node in IIS, you should say application pools. Okay, now this lists all the default application pools that we have when we install IIS. Now let's go ahead and create one application pool here. So I'm going to add an application pool and I'm going to call that application 1 pool. So we want to associate our web application 1 project with that application pool. And then I want to select .NET version framework, .NET Framework version 4.0. So we have created the application 1 pool, and if you look at the number of applications that are associated with this pool at the moment are 0. Okay, let's go ahead and add a virtual directory which can be used, basically we want to point this web application 1, we want the virtual directory to be pointing to this web application 1. So let's go ahead and create that application here. So right click on default website, click on add application, give it a meaningful name. I'm going to call this web application 1. So that's going to be my virtual directory name. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to associate, look at that, by default this application is associated with ASP.NET version 4.0. I don't want that. I want to associate that with application 1 pool. So let's click OK, and let's navigate to the physical path where we have this project created. The project is actually present in C drive. So if you look at this project, web application 1, I right click on the solution folder and then open folder in Windows Explorer. So C:\web application 1, that's the solution folder and that's the project folder. So let's go ahead and associate to that folder. So that's the physical folder. So C drive, and let's navigate to web application 1. That's the solution folder and that's the project folder. Okay. So now we have this web application 1 which is associated with this web application 1 that we have, and we are using, if you go to the application pools, we are actually using application 1 pool for this web application 1. Okay, now another change that we have to do is, even at this time, if we press Control F5, Visual Studio still uses the built-in ASP.NET development server. We don't want that. We want to use local IIS, and to do that, right click on your web application project, go to the properties window, and within the properties, look at that, it's using Visual Studio development server. Instead of that, I'm going to use local IIS web server. And look at this, we already have a virtual directory with this name, so I'm not going to click this button. So I'm just going to save that. Okay, so obviously now if I go ahead and run this, it should use the local IIS instead of the built-in Visual Studio Development Server. Okay, I click this button, I have the data. Alright, now what we are going to do, I have another instance of Visual Studio here, and the name of this web application is web application 2. I have webform1.aspx here. Now let's drag and drop a button control onto this web form as well, and I'm going to have exactly the same code even in this application. So let's go ahead and copy that from web application 1. So I'm going to retrieve that and paste it here along the same lines. Whatever we have in the button click event handler, let's copy that and put it in the button click event handler in web application 2. Okay, along the same lines, let's go ahead and associate this to the same application pool for the time being. So I have application 1 pool. Let me go ahead and create another application under default websites. So add application, I'm going to give this the name web application 2, and I still want to associate this with the same application pool. So application 1 pool. Okay, and then let's navigate to the physical path. This time it's going to be web application 2 project. So that's the solution folder. Expand, select the project folder. Look at that. Okay, web application 2, that's the name of the application, that's the pool, and that's our physical path where we have this web project. So let's click OK. So at this point, if you understand the setup, we have two web application projects, web application 1 and web application 2. By the way, the small change that we have to do here is, instead of application 1 data, I'm going to call this application 2 data. Okay, it's exact same code, we just have the different keys. Okay, so let me change this to application 2 and this to application 2. Okay, alright. So if you look at the application pools now, we have one application pool and it contains both these web applications. Okay, now let's go ahead and associate this web application, this project, to the local IIS on the project properties window. Right click on the project, go to the properties, and within the properties window, instead of using Visual Studio built-in development server, I'm going to use the local IIS web server. Okay, and we already have the virtual directory, so simply save the settings. Okay, alright, now let's go ahead and run web application 1. Now if you understand the whole setup at the moment, we have two web applications, both of them are associated with these application pool. So let me go ahead and run first web application 1, and let me go ahead and run web application 2 as well. Okay, so that's web application 2, that's web application 1. Okay, now let's go ahead and open the task manager, and to do that, right click on your taskbar, select start task manager, and click on this button, show processes from all users. And look at that, once you click on that button, press W, you should see there is a worker process. Look at the worker process. So the worker process w3wp.exe, that's the worker process which is used to run our ASP.NET web applications. And look at that, that worker process is associated with application 1 pool. That's the username. We'll talk about security, application pool security in the next video session, but at this point understand that this one worker process is actually running both web application 1 and web application 2. And if you remember, we are using session variables in both the applications, and since in web.config I haven't specified the session state provider, by default it's going to be in proc. The session state mode is going to be in proc, meaning the session variables are actually stored inside the worker process, inside this w3wp.exe. Okay, now let's go ahead and click this button. Okay, I get application 2 data is equal to application 2 data. And let's click this button on application 1. Look at the URL. So application 1 data is equal to application 1 data. So both of these session variables now for this application, that's web application 1 and web application 2, for both the applications, this session variable is actually stored in this worker process. And look at that, for that application pool at the moment we just have one worker process running both of these applications. Okay, now let's say for some reason the application pool recycle. And there are a variety of reasons why an application pool will be recycled, either automatically or on demand. We'll talk about those reasons in a later video session, but let's assume for some reason this application 1 pool got recycled. When it gets recycled, since both of these applications are associated with the same pool, the worker process within that application pools get recycled, and as a result of which the session variables for both the applications are affected. Okay, so let's recycle the application pool. And how do we do that? If you want to do that on demand, select application pools, and there I have my application pool. Right click that and you have an option to recycle. So once I recycle that, so I go here and click this button. Look at that, session data not available, session data not available. Okay, both of the applications are affected. Now let's do a small change. Let's create another application pool here and then associate web application 2 with that application pool. And to do that, add application pool. I'm going to call this application 2 pool. Let's select .NET version framework 4.0. I click OK. And now I'm going to associate web application 2 with that application pool, application 2 pool. And to do that, right click on your web application project, manage application, advanced settings, and then in the application pool property, click on the ellipsis button and select your application pool. So I want to associate web application 2 with application 2 pool. And let's click OK. So if you look at the application pools now, web application 1 is associated with application 1 pool, and web application 2 is associated with application 2 pool. Okay, at this stage, let's go ahead and run this. So let me first run web application 1. So I am on webform1.aspx, and along the same lines, let's go to web application 2 and let's run that. And now let's go back to the task manager and let's look at that. There are two worker processes now, one worker process for application 1 pool and another worker process for application 2 pool. So obviously now when I click on that button for web application 1, I see the session data. Similarly for application 2, I see the session data. Okay, now let's say for some reason application 1 pool is recycled. Okay, so let's go ahead and recycle that. But I'm not recycling application 2 pool. So obviously at this point, as you might expect, if I click this button on web application 1, the session data will be lost. But whereas application 2, I didn't recycle that, and it has its own worker process. So obviously this application now is not affected. We don't lose session variables for web application 2. That's because now it's running inside its own application pool. So we have isolated web application 2 from web application 1 by deploying them to different application pools. In the next video session, we'll discuss about configuring different levels of security for different application pools. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.